Hello folks, welcome to Connecticut Chestnuts Your Orchard Series Part 6. Today we're going to talk about planting and getting your trees in the ground. Planting time is an exciting time for you and you want to be prepared. Your berry trees are going to arrive and you want to get them in the ground as soon as possible. At this point, you should have your ground ready and prepared for planting by April 1st. Our trees arrived on April 15th and we had them, all 620 of them, in the ground by April 17th on planting day. One very important thing you have to consider is cross-pollination in your orchard. First thing you have to do is go over all the information about the varieties you have coming in. You need to put your best pollinators upwind of the rest of your orchard. This way the wind will scatter the pollen throughout the orchard and give you a better, more even harvest. The National Weather Service will give you an idea of your prevailing winds in the spring for your area. Your best pollinators may not be the trees that produce the most pollen, but the ones that produce pollen for the longest amount of time throughout the blooming season. If you plant your earliest or latest producers on the upwind side of your orchard, they will likely not be sending pollen through the area when the other trees need it. Chestnut trees are pollinated through the wind and not likely with insects. Bees are attracted to chestnut pollen only when there is nothing else blooming. Our seedlings showed up in large boxes, 620 trees bundled in packs of 20. The first thing I did was to gather 25 free 5-gallon buckets to separate each variety in a separate bucket. Some varieties included had 20, 40, and 60 of each variety. In order to keep the crews planting the varieties in the rows I wanted, I simply loaded each bucket accordingly and made a master plan of what I wanted planted. Some of our rows are all one variety, but as we got towards the center of the orchard, we had 20 of this variety and 20 of that variety, and the row changes halfway down or a third of the way down. Pre-planting will minimize confusion and reward you a more consistent harvest time. Planting earlier and later producers together will allow you to harvest a single section of your orchard at a time and minimize having to cover the entire orchard every day of harvest. Planting day can go much quicker if you have all the stakes in the ground beforehand. Getting each stake pounded in can be a big, time-consuming chore. We drove each oak stake in the ground on our marks with the post pounders. While it was time-consuming and tiresome, it took two of us about 15 hours to complete this. Taking this step out of planting day was a real help as far as getting all the planting done in one day. Another important thing to remember is to have all your tubes laid out flat. They were likely shipped curled up and they will form into cylinders much easier if they've been laying flat. You could also roll them into cylinders and loosely attach the top wire ties and the bottom wire ties. Storing them this way will help you later on. We saw a tremendous amount of growth in our orchard early on, and one of the factors that contributed to this too is root dip. Root dip gives the trees a boost that they need to shoot up when they come out of dormancy. Root dip comes as a powder that you mix with water and just dip your roots in just before planting. It is somewhat syrupy and clings to the root and is loaded with microbes that your young trees can feed on for a few months. Think of root dip as a ready-to-eat fertilizer for your young trees. We ran out of root dip for the last 20 or so trees, and you can see the difference in those trees even 2 years later. I believe the root dip we used had a beneficial strain of microbes that set up house and continue to feed our trees today. The strain of microbes in your soil that was feeding corn, hay, or tomatoes may feed your chestnut trees well enough, but the right strain, proven great for the trees, will kick your orchard off as great as possible. The root dip we used and proved invaluable was bought from ProTube. I am sure there are many others out there, but we ordered theirs with our tubes. Each 2-ounce package of root dip from Tree Pro is supposed to cover 350 seedlings. We ran short after dipping 600 trees with 2 packages but that was likely due to the very large bushy root systems on the chestnut seedlings from Route 9 Co-op. Root dip is cheap, order extra for planting day. Digging your holes is the next thing for you to think about. How you go about this task may depend on your particular soil type and equipment you have on hand. First thing I considered was a post hole digger on the back of a tractor. One very important factor in planting your trees is you do not want to dig deeper than the roots need. Digging too deep means there is a column of loose soil under your trees, and when the soil packs back down, your trees will be settled in too deep or low in the ground. Even though I own a tractor and an auger with 3 different sized bits, getting that bit perfectly in line both ways in the orchard and digging down just 12 to 18 inches and stopping it and raising it was just a lot of work for such a small hole that could be dug easily with 1 or 2 scoops of a spade in the ground that we had tilled. We also bought a few augers for the drills, thinking an auger would quickly make a small, deep enough hole for each tree. But testing proved our soil was too soft for that, and the holes collapsed in as soon as the auger was pulled out. The method that we did use was fantastic, and it was a root spade on the end of our excavator boom. As our stakes were in the ground, we were able to drive up and down the rows, taking one swipe and making a hole more than sufficient for our root systems. It only took about 2 to 3 hours with the excavator to dig all 620 holes. This may not be practical for you, but we always have a couple of excavators around the farm anyway. If you put together a crew for planting or two on planting day, it's very important that you tell them, above all else, do not curl the roots up in the hole. If the hole turns out to not be deep enough, they can take a shovelful out and make sure the roots are down straight. You can also trim the roots off a little so they fit in well. It doesn't hurt to trim the roots of bare root trees. Curled up roots or tap roots will hamper the growth of your trees for many years to come. Before planting day, you should have a plan to get each and every tree watered the same day as planting. The first watering pushes the air out and fills the voids of dirt around the roots and settles the tree in. I can't stress enough how important this watering is to your trees. We had one guy on watering detail as soon as the first trees were put in the ground. Each and every tree should get 1 to 2 gallons of water the same day as they're planted in the ground. This can be accomplished many ways, but a 275-gallon clean tote on the front of a tractor or in the bed of a UTV or pickup will do this task very well. The water can be gravity fed or dispersed with a small 12-volt pump. It is important that you have this system worked out ahead of time. You'll need to know where you're going to get your water, as it will take a few tanks depending on how many trees you are planting. Each planting crew should have 2 or more people, one setting and planting the trees and another servicing the tubes and putting them on the stakes. Getting the tubes right for each tree can be a little tricky, and as long as they get them on, you can always go back and make them right later. Just as long as they have protection from the deer that first night, you should be okay. We have heard stories of guys coming back the next morning to find that the deer pulled all of the trees out of the ground because they didn't have the tubes on.